We are joined now by Marc Owen Jones, Associate Professor of Middle East Studies at Hamad Bin Khalifa University. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Is it unusual for a US president to begin and really focus on foreign policy in a State of the Union address?
I mean, I don't think it is unusual. I don't think it's unusual considering the situation we're in now, which is an ongoing genocide in Gaza perpetrated by one of the US's closest allies, perpetrated by an ally that has historically played a very important role in lobbying in the US, and whether you're Republican or Democrat, trying to secure, the AIPAC vote, the Israel lobby's vote, is important. So I think Biden, in particular, knowing as well that Trump is incredibly pro-Israel and his contender, is making sure that he puts that front and center. Not least because, obviously, the US want to demonstrate their commitment to Israel, but also Biden is also aware that there is this backlash, a growing backlash, against the US's support for Israel. Yeah,
and yet, despite beginning his State of the Union address by talking about foreign policy, and you mentioned the genocide in Gaza. That's not what he began the address. He actually started talking about Russia and Ukraine. When he did get to the point about what's happening in Gaza, he mentions building a temporary port on Gaza's coast to allow more aid in. Why is he making such an announcement when there are many trucks waiting at Gaza's borders that Israel is impeding?
Well, it's a very I say bizarre state of affairs, but it's in a state of affairs that's hardly surprising now, given what's happened over the past couple of weeks, right? Israel have refused and they've hindered the supply of aid across the border, the most efficient form of delivering aid through trucks across Rafah. This is part of their war on UNRWA. And as a result, we've seen the US and some of its allies airdropping aid into Gaza, which is both inefficient and expensive. And also, it's a huge publicity stunt. It's designed to be a spectacle that attempts to demonstrate that the US are trying their best to try and remedy this humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And fundamentally, it's about the fact that the US are, I would say, unable, to an extent, unable to pressure Israel into allowing aid. I say unable, but there's an element of an unwilling too. And when I say element of unwilling, this goes back to the initial point I was saying about the US, Biden, Democrats and Republicans alike are concerned about Israel's support, right? And so if Biden is seen to be too harsh on Israel, even if he feels that, he's aware that he has a contender, a very, popular contender, who might use, Biden's perceived weakness in maybe, supporting Israel as a form of trying to...
But whose votes is he trying to get here? Because the majority of Democrats support a ceasefire in Gaza.
But the majority of the Democrats and the majority of people in many countries who support Israel support a ceasefire. And I think the case of whether it's the base is not necessarily relevant here, because we know that US politics is so profoundly based on the power of lobbying. So I think that's a really important consideration. We can't just talk about how the popular demands of the people is actually reflected in not just US politics, but I would say democratic politics across Europe, because it's not.
So are you saying then that the lobbies right now in America are more powerful than the people and what the people want?
I would say lobbying is incredibly important, and big money, whether through lobbies or other forms or super PACs in US politics, are really important in defining policy, but particularly foreign policy.
Yeah. We've got the CIA chief who's in Doha today after being in Egypt yesterday. And this is being seen as a last-ditch attempt for a ceasefire. Just finally, how do you assess the prospects of him getting anywhere?
Well, I think it's a sign of the urgency that people feel about securing a ceasefire deal before Ramadan. But I think it's hard for us to fundamentally know. We've had Hamas accuse Netanyahu of walking away. We've had Israel also accuse Hamas of sabotaging the ceasefire. This is normal politics. This kind of charade that we're seeing doesn't necessarily suggest that there won't be a ceasefire before Ramadan. But I think as Israel continues to hinder aid and these kind of desperate attempts to have this kind of port established in Gaza reflect a level of exasperation and desperation that suggests that we might be quite far from having a ceasefire secured.
Marc Owen Jones, thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate it.